Poznań, Poland, and I will have the great privilege to starting today's meeting and introducing our guest who is agreed to give a lecture at the invitation of Dr. Weronika Trzmielewska and our university and the Social Psychology Special Interest Group. I'm certain that our speaker today, Professor Roya Baumeistera, is known to most of you through his wonderful, groundbreaking research work, which has led to the development of many areas of psychological studies. Professor Baumeister was associated to such institutions as the Princeton University, the Case Western Reserve University, the University of Texas, the Max Planck Institute, and the University of California. In his work, Professor Baumeister deals with different topics such as self-regulation, sense of belonging, interpersonal aggression, and this will be the topic of today's meeting, the topic of free will. He is the author of several hundred scientific articles and dozens of books, and he's certainly one of the most important figures in the 20th century psychology. Dear Professor Baumeister, we are truly honored that you agreed to accept our invitation, and I think the floor is yours.
Just a second, give me only one word, one sentence to say. We would like to wish you because we knew that you had you have your birthday a few days ago. So yeah, happy birthday from whole university or for whole community. And yeah, right now you can start, of course.
All right. Well, thank you. That was a very kind introduction, and I appreciate the birthday wishes. All right. My topic today is to build a positive scientific theory of free will. This is based on a book which I've written, which will be published this autumn in September. Now, over the years, I have met many scientists who say there can be no free will, there could be no scientific theory of it. Others are fine and accept the idea. I find I agree with both of them because they're not talking about the same thing. So if we look closer, what is it that they disagree about? I've reviewed many different areas, and I often find both sides have a valid point. So here is someone very skeptical of free will, eminent biologist writing in an important biology journal. Free will is the idea we make choices and have thoughts independent of anything remotely resembling a physical process. Free will is the close cousin to the idea of the soul. Well, I don't believe in that as a psychological, scientific idea either. So if we understand free will that way, then no, I don't believe in it. On the other hand, here are people constructing a much more usable, practical definition. This was an interdisciplinary group of scholars preparing definitions for a competition on grants. Essentially, free will is being able to act differently in the same situation. So it's not the close cousin to the idea of the soul. It's more related to flexibility in behavior, which I think most biologists will tell you is a very adaptive thing. Behavior basically occurs when the brain tells the muscles how to move the bones. So anything that we're going to call free will is the input into that system, how the brain tells the muscles to move the body. Flexibility in that system, being able to adapt to different circumstances to change how one acts, that would be highly adaptive, even early in evolution, perhaps for fooling other animals who want to eat you. But in human life, especially exploring, learning, adapting to culture, all this may be valuable. Now, as I said, I've talked to many scientists who do and many scientists who do not accept free will. You might think that they would have very different ideas about how behavior is caused, that their psychological theories would be radically different. They're not. When I talk to them, they have the same understanding of how the brain works, how the muscles move the bones, how attitudes and emotions work, self-control, all these things. They have a lot of the same beliefs and theories. So that makes me think that maybe the disagreement is not that important. They agree about how behavior is caused. And here's the thing that's most remarkable. Both sides agree that the system in the human mind, the way that the human brain controls behavior, is far, far different from anything else in nature, including the other apes, who are our closest biological relatives. The human behavior is so very different, including what we're doing right now. No other animals do anything like this. So they merely disagree as to whether this marvelous new psychological system deserves to be called free will. So it's a dispute about terminology, and that is not really something we can resolve with scientific research and experiments. To me, the scientific challenge is to understand this remarkable new system and what makes it so different from everything else in nature. Now, I don't want to dodge the question, so let me address, do I believe in free will or not? I think if we discovered this new mental system today, if it were a new scientific discovery, we would probably come up with a different term for it than free will. But given that the term has been used for over 1,000 years, maybe we should stay with it. And more precisely, I think the free part is not really a problem to me. As you'll see, I think human behavior is clearly freer than others. The will part is the more difficult part of the definition. There's no psychology of will. When you look in psychology textbooks these days, the modern psychology textbooks, they do not have a chapter on the will. So the will is a metaphor, but the free, I think, is quite real and legitimate. Now, some people get into trouble or get objections when they think freedom has to be complete. That people, if there's free will, it means everything people do is free and independent of causes and all that. Well, in psychology, almost everything is on a continuum. So absolute freedom or absolute unfreedom, if those are the only two options, that's not really a choice that psychologists can work on. Instead, think of it as a continuum, a scale. Some actions are freer than others. And so the human mind has learned to be able to override some causes, and sometimes it cannot do so. But everyone has had the experience of making choices when you are more free or less free to choose what you want to do. So I think we need to understand the mental process that works in these relatively freer cases. All right, now let me, with that as background, let me go to the ideas as I laid them out in my book. I mean, we start with the question, why do people care about free will? Why does it even matter? Well, moral responsibility is one major concern. Freedom, free will has often been tied to moral responsibility. Are people responsible for their actions, even in a court of law? If you perform the action freely, you're more guilty and more responsible than if you were not free when you perform the actions. Morality is important to society. Societies function better when people are morally responsible. Indeed, even in the laboratory, when you make people responsible or accountable, their behavior improves. They are more thoughtful, more careful, and better prepared. There might be other reasons to care about free will, the dignity of the human. We think of ourselves as making choices and decisions. It is kind of insulting to some people to tell them that, no, you didn't really have a choice. What you were going to do was already determined by external factors. You don't really have any control over it. So people might care about that. In terms of what people mean, especially ordinary people, by free will, now philosophical definitions have become very complex, but psychologists do research on what do ordinary people understand by free will. There was the result of a study we did some years ago where we asked people to tell a story from their own lives when they acted of their own free will, or a story from their own life when they did not act of their own free will. Everyone was able to do this. First of all, nobody said, oh, I've never acted of my own free will. I don't have free will. No, everybody was able to furnish a story of either type. So then we took all the stories and compared the two groups of stories. So the stories that had free will, where people acted of their own free will, they had happier endings, as told at least by the person doing it. They were able to, so free will again is adaptive. It gets you what you want. It helps you reach goals, especially long-term goals. Short-term goals were not so much evident in there, which again, this is a way we evolved beyond the other animals. They're all able to do what they impulsively feel like doing right now. But to pursue long-term goals, this is something humans do much more effectively, and free will seems to be associated with that, at least in people's experiences as they told them to us. It was better for them, it was better for their social group as well. Fits the idea that morality helps society work better. The free choices were associated with more conscious thinking about it than the unfree choices. They pondered the alternatives, decided what they thought they wanted to do, what would be best. Again, they were morally superior, more virtuous in the good actions than the bad actions. Also, they talked about resisting external forces and not having powerful other people tell them what to do. And that's a common experience when you don't have freedom, when there's a lot of external pressure to act on a certain way. Though if there's pressure and you resist the external pressure, then that's associated more with free will. All right, so that's what we're talking about, at least in ordinary people's understanding. Now, if we're going to develop a scientific theory, it helps to think, what would be the ingredients of a scientific theory? Again, the purpose of it is to explain this new mental power, this new mentality that the human has, this new way that the human brain causes behavior that's different from what the other apes and other animals have, such things as conscious thought, using logic and rationality, reasons, and so on. A scientific theory will have nothing that's supernatural. It's got to be compatible with evolution and other facts about nature. It may involve culture too, but supernatural entities like souls and angels and gods, these are not part of a scientific theory, whether or not they really exist. As I said, freedom is on a continuum. We're not looking for complete or absolute freedom. Just some actions are freer than others. And also, scientific theories are causal theories. So free will would just be another kind of cause. Some of the scientists who reject free will think it means that causality does not apply. Well, I sympathize with them. If there's no causality, it's not a scientific theory. But rather, free will would just be another kind of cause. And there are thousands and thousands of causes in all of the sciences. There are quite a few even just in psychology. So one more is hardly a remarkable thing to postulate. Now, I said a free will scientific theory has to be compatible with evolution. So let's reflect for a minute. I mean, I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but everything starts with evolution. And so we have to begin there and make it evolutionary plausible. As the philosopher Dennett said, free will is only worth having if it helps you get what you want. And I would add in what you need. So evolution is designing the mind to enable the animal to do things so it can survive longer and reproduce. Life needs to sustain life, or else there's just death. Throughout evolution, the changes were designed to improve the quantity of life, make you live longer and reproduce more, and more recently also to improve the quality of life. Now, I think free will probably enables the human being to operate in a social system, especially with advanced culture. I'll come back to that in a minute, which suggests that the need for free will, this originates in the social system, not in the individual. So free will is better. A society where people have free will function better because people will be held responsible for their actions, so they behave in a more moral, more virtuous fashion. They have to self-regulate to follow rules. They have to exercise authority when they have it. There are only a couple animals that have large societies, more than, say, 100 or 200 people. Some tiny insects like ants and humans. And it's interesting to compare those. Ant societies have many features that human ones do, but there are no bosses. No bosses. No ant tells other ants what to do, whereas most human organizations include bosses that have to make and enforce the rules and tell others what to do and to show leadership. The basis of my thinking for the last 20 years or more is that the human mind was created by nature for culture. In other words, it was crafted by evolution, by natural selection. That's nature. But culture is the way that our species solves the problems of survival and reproduction. By sharing information, division of labor, working together, all the other features of culture, we prolong life. And it's very effective. Our population is much bigger than all the other apes. Indeed, most mammal populations are declining while the human one continues to increase. So the implication of this view that we are essentially cultural animals is that the traits that make us human, the ones that set us apart from all the other creatures, the essence of being human, these traits are the result of biological adaptations to make culture possible. Starting with language is an obvious one. All human societies have language. No animal societies have language to the extent that linguists believe in it. They have a little bit of communication, but no language. And as I read the research literature on evolution, the biggest ways that humans are different from the other animals and the other apes, more communication and more cooperation. Free will, in any case, will be one of those traits that's distinctive to humans, and thus probably the result of biological evolution designed to make us able to participate in culture. Cultural systems benefit when people have free will, and I think responsibility and autonomy are the two things that the culture wants individuals to have so it can function better. So autonomy means governing yourself, making your own decisions, taking care of yourself. Responsibility means understanding the consequences of your actions, accepting them, and adjusting your actions accordingly. So in terms of what does the social system need to be in the individual mind for human society to be possible with culture, I think of it as responsible autonomy, and that would be an operational definition of free will. I also like to make this point, maybe free will is for following rules. Culture has a lot of rules. When I put this up, many people are surprised because they think, well, freedom would mean doing whatever I want with no rules. But you don't need anything special in your mind to do that. Any animal out in the forest is capable of doing whatever it wants with no rules. What's much more difficult is to operate in an environment with many complicated rules and still take care of yourself and still get what you want. Here's a better way of putting it. It's for enabling individual creatures to pursue their self-interest, indeed enlightened self-interest, in a social environment with many rules. Culture has to have rules. All right, with that as background, let's start. What are some of the features of the theory of free will? Now, let me keep track of the time here. First of all, time is very important. The human self extends across time. We forget most animals live right in the immediate present, in the here and now. If they have learned lessons from the past, but it's not clear that they can even remember specific things from the past. And they certainly show little awareness of the future. Whereas our behavior, we can talk about things that happened to us years ago, and we can plan and adjust our behavior going years into the future. Again, this is good for social systems, enforces responsibility and so on. It's beneficial for the individual because instead of always doing what seems best right now, sometimes we can do what's best in the long run. Morality depends on reputation, which extends over time. So you behave well now so that you will have a good reputation. If you do something bad now, years in the future, people will remember it, and it will damage your social standing and your opportunities. So understanding the present is part of an ongoing story that connects past and future, and the present is part of that. So this is one of the ways in which the human mind has gone beyond other animals in evolution to behave in a more free fashion. We can understand the implications for the future. So that's the first part of the theory. Before I go on to more, there are two side issues which I want to address. So let me just one more thing on time. So being able to envision alternative futures, we can leap into the future in our minds, imagine, well, if I do this, it will lead to this. If I do that, it will lead to that, and so on. I can compare those and then bring that information back to the present and use it to decide what we are going to do right now. That's how free will uses the advanced understanding of time to steer events toward what will be best in the long run. Now, these two other points. First of all, to help you understand what I'm talking about, to imagine it more precisely, let me give three examples of the kind of agent that has free will, again, pretty much specific to human beings. First, each person is a moral agent. I've touched on this already. We understand moral principles. We argue about them with others. That we may adjust our morals to different situations. Responsibility and autonomy are both affected by understanding morality and incorporating morality into how the brain tells the muscles to move the bones. That's important. Another very different but very important one is as an economic agent. Trade is very old in human behavior, much older than farming, maybe 10 times as old as farming, according to Matt Ridley. So trade is a form of cooperation. The buyer wants to buy, the seller wants to sell. If you can agree, then you are both better off. And as far as we can tell, no other animals have a real marketplace. None of them has money. But all human societies today, at least all countries, have money, and all of them engage in trade internally and sometimes externally. It's been a key to the success of our species, but again requires mental powers far in advance of what other animals have. And last, everyone is an information agent. We take in information, we talk about it, we share it with others, we criticize it, we see whether it's consistent with other ideas, and so on. We share this. This is, again, something that people do much more extensively than other animals. Other animals have curiosity, but it's not even clear that they intentionally communicate. And they've evolved sometimes to make a noise when there's a dangerous animal around. But it's not clear that they're thinking, oh, I need to tell all the others there's danger. They just automatically start making noise, quacking, squeaking, whatever. And the others understand that. But humans we have an urge to tell others what's in our mind, to share what we find out, what we learn, and to argue about it, and so on. So all of these help the cultural system flourish and to help the individual to flourish within the system. All of them involve communication and cooperation. So when I talk about free will, it's useful to imagine any of these three kinds of human agent, of which, again, we're all of us are all of them, pretty much. Another point before I get further in developing the theory, something that many scientific arguments stumble on, is free will basically random action. This is partly the way scientists think of it. If they're free will, it would have to be something random, but it comes from this idea that freedom means being exempt from causality. Whereas I'm saying free will is just another kind of cause. It can make you exempt to override certain causes. But again, it's another kind of cause itself. Scientists will mostly look for, is behavior caused? So they will manipulate something and then measure the behavior. And they think, well, if there's free will, it would show up as error variance, as random behavior. And so they wonder, how can there be randomness? There's general opinion that at the particle physics, there's a certain degree of randomness in the behavior of tiny particles. And some people wonder, well, somehow does this randomness come up into the brain and make brain cells fire at random? Does that produce free will? But no, that's the wrong place to look. Now, there's also evidence that when people are judging others, if they see random behavior, they associate that more with free will as opposed to being totally predictable. But being predictable makes you look like you're programmed. So I think that's not a very strong evidence. The crucial point here, remember my argument that we are cultural animals, that the human mind evolved to participate in culture. Culture does not like random behavior. Culture is for predictable, doing your job, performing your role, doing what you're supposed to, following the rules. Would you hire a plumber who did random things to your plumbing? Would you take your child to a doctor who did random things in surgery? No, of course not. You want them to do very precisely the job that they're supposed to do. Culture is an organized system. It does not have much place for randomness. Random action, I mean, think of the moral agent who acted randomly would do immoral things. Think of the economic agent who acted randomly. You would make bad deals and lose money. Think of the information agent who just said random things. You would get known as a liar and as an unreliable source. Random action is not what free will is about. So don't get confused by that. All right, back to the developing our theory of free will. Motivation, I think, is the basis. In terms of psychology, motivation is the closest to survival and reproduction. You want food because you need it to survive. You want water, you want safety, you want sleep, you want sex. That's crucial for reproduction and creating new life. So motivation is very basic. If we break psychology into cognition, emotion, and motivation, well, you can make the argument that cognition and emotion are there to help motivation. But if it's what you want, that is the start of it. And so the agent, which takes actions and thus free will, that is based on motivation. The simpler agents that animals have, that by which the brain tells their muscles how to move their body, that is there to enable them to get what they want, which is to get food and not to be killed and eaten by bigger animals. One of my favorite lines about this is from the author Steven Pinker, who wrote in one of his books. He said, well, there were all those movies about how computers take over the world for a while. There were a lot of them. And well, it just seems like it's dangerous. Computers are smarter than we are. They can think better than we can. But he said, why would they take over? What would they want? More surge protectors, more backup disks. The computers don't want anything. They don't mind when you turn them off. They don't mind when you throw them away and recycle them. It's only with life that motivation starts to exist. So being able to think, cognition alone is not enough. The agent is there, and free will is there, and humans as an advanced form of the agent to help us get the things that we want and need. Now, we adapt to an environment which is uncertain. And this is where my background as a social psychologist is relevant. I think many scientists thinking about free will, they stumble with the idea that, well, if all the causes created you as your certain self, now how can that lead into different directions, into different actions? Somehow it seems like you are changing the power to send causality in different directions. Well, I agree, that's difficult, that's perhaps implausible. But if the possibilities are out there in the situation, then the human mental state just evolves to capitalize them. It doesn't produce the alternative possibilities, it sees them and acts on them for advantage. So in a sense, freedom is in the situations. Now it becomes complex because we also create situations. But the basic evolution of freedom is not somehow creating multiple possibilities out of nothing, but rather capitalizing on them and starting with the basic fact of life, which is that death is always possible. So you want to sustain life. So the multiple possibilities are out there. They're not the product of your mind. They're there to some extent in the physical environment and much, much more in the social environment. The human social environment contains many possibilities. Even agreeing to attend the talk today for me and for you, that was a possibility, and we could have said no and refused to do it. So there are many features of the situation, and social psychology studies those and documents them very excessively. And so my point is, free will, it's adaptive to be flexible when confronting a situation with many different possibilities. Indeed, there's evidence that only the human mind can really understand these multiple possibilities. The great study by Redshaw and Sudendorf, I'll tell you, I'll describe the experiment. They had a tube which they would drop a treat in, and then it would fall out the bottom of the tube and fall into a hole and be gone. But if you were the research subject, if you put out your hand, you could catch it. So the subjects in this study were 2-year-old children, 3-year-old children, 4-year-old children, and then adult chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans. So the smartest of the apes, our closest relatives, as adults against human children. Okay, everybody learned to do this. Everybody learned to put out the hand and catch the treat. Okay, so far so good. Then the researchers brought out a second tube. It's the same long tube, except it has 2 openings at the bottom. And so just at random, the treat comes out on the left or on the right. So then you're only guessing, you only get the treat half the time, unless you use both hands. So you need to prepare for both possibilities. Well, the 2-year-old children could not figure this out, but the 3-year-old ones did, and the 4-year-olds, like this girl, got it right every time out of 20 trials. So they were able to prepare for it. None of the apes could figure it out. So this to me is a profound point. Understanding that there are multiple possibilities and preparing for multiple possibilities. This is something only humans do. It's something that humans developed to do. That at 2 years old, as I said, they could not do it. But 3 or 4, which is most experts say this is when the human mind moves beyond the other animals, was able to do that. It's interesting, in fact, in the experiment, some of the apes did, everyone had 20 trials. Some of them once or twice actually did put out both hands and got the treat. So they solved the problem, but they didn't realize it. Then they went back to just guessing with one hand. they had stumbled on the correct solution that would enable them to get the treat every time, and yet they didn't stick with it. So again, an important feature of the human mind. So where the indeterminacy and freedom comes from, I think it's from the development of ever greater social systems. As social systems become more complex, they create more and more possibilities. This is something I'm told philosophers have not delved into all that much. They tend to think of things in terms of physical possibilities. But I think that's an important way moving forward to develop. All right, next point, consciousness. There are no theories, as far as I can tell, of unconscious free will. So conscious thinking is, if we're going to accept free will, conscious thinking has to be part of it, and thus has to have some kind of causal role in it. So there becomes the question, do conscious thoughts indeed cause behavior? It turns out this is something scholars have debated for 2 centuries, possibly more. Now, as I said, there's a controversy with some extreme views. There were these studies by the Libet, which I won't go into, but many people are familiar with them, who found that the brain activity commenced before people remembered making a conscious decision. But that doesn't mean that the consciousness didn't have a causal role. And to many of us, the brain has to create the conscious experience. So of course it has to get busy a moment in advance. About half a second was the estimate. So that question remained unresolved. And I talked to some of my colleagues about this. Is how could we find out? How can we get scientific evidence as to whether conscious thinking causes behavior? Well, science knows how to study causality. You do an experiment. In humans, you have to have random assignment because people are different. And so random assign among conditions, and then the differences even out. And so we would look for studies in which there was an independent variable that was manipulated by random assignment that included some conscious state, conscious thought, conscious feeling. So you have some people have this conscious thought, others not have this thought. And then you'd have to measure behavior to see, did it have an effect? And that way you could tell if consciousness does indeed cause behavior. Well, the answer is overwhelmingly yes. We found quite a bit of these. In fact, the article was published in the Annual Review of Psychology. And anyone who wants to question this further, go ahead and look up the article. There's lots and lots of evidence. So as far as I'm concerned, the question is settled. Does conscious thinking cause behavior? Yes, absolutely. I think there can be no doubt, given the huge mass of scientific evidence. I mean, some of the things, mental simulation, if you think about doing something, it makes you more likely to do it. This includes in sports, mentally practicing the sport. It's not a substitute for physical practice, but it helps additionally. And it's been studied in almost every sport, and it pretty much always works. Likewise, people make plans, or they expect, they anticipate something, or they intend something versus they don't. Again, changes behavior. Thinking about the past, you can replay the past, reinterpret it. Think about, well, what if happened if I did something different? All these make differences in behavior. Logical reasoning affects behavior. Logical reasoning depends on consciousness. We did a whole series of studies on that the unconscious is not really capable of logic. You have to use consciousness there. Thinking about what other people are thinking, in negotiation studies, imagining the other person's perspective helps reach better results, and so on. This is just a few categories. There are a whole bunch more. As I said, anyone interested, I can look up the article, or I can send it to you. After we got the yes answer, we didn't stop there. We wanted to go farther. So how is it? Let's go back over all this evidence. How do conscious thoughts cause behavior? First, the effects were indirect. It's not directly causing behavior. I mean, the direct cause of your behavior is the nerve cells carrying the message from the brain to tell the muscles how to move the bones. You're not conscious of the nerve cells firing. So the consciousness occurs several steps removed from input and output, but it includes imagining, thinking about things away from the here and now, whether it's in the future or what's going on in the other building or what other people might be thinking and so on. There was no proof that making choices were inherently conscious. It could be that you ponder it consciously so that you can review the options better, and then the unconscious makes the choice and then tells consciousness so it can share it with the rest of the brain. Also, we had no evidence that the impulse to act originates in consciousness. Remember, impulses originate in motivation, which may originate deep in the body. You suddenly feel thirsty, and so you want a drink of water. That's a change in the bodily state, but they come into consciousness, and then you can decide whether to get a drink or not. So the role of consciousness is somewhat limited, but still there are many diverse and well studied, well proven signs of how conscious thoughts cause behavior, usually beneficially. Some are not beneficial. All right, how are we doing on time? Meaning changes everything. So meaning is important in consciousness. The animals behave, but their use of meaning is rather limited, and it's especially just associations that they've learned in their own experience, whereas we use all kinds of complex meanings. I can give a scholarly argument here, but since this is a talk, let me be a more entertaining. I'll tell a story about my father to sort of illustrate the point. He was born in Germany and grew up in Würzburg, and everybody knew was Catholic, so he was Catholic too. He was Christian. I don't think he was all that excited about it, but so he started. And religion, of course, is a very meaningful, very important part of life. Then he went to the war and had a hard time there, and ended up in Russian prison camp and so on. After the war, he met an American woman who was going to be a German teacher. And so they fell in love. These were my parents, and they married and moved back to the US, but they had a problem. She was a Protestant. He was a Catholic. And so he wasn't sure, should he change his faith to match hers? She didn't want to change. And he got a job at a company, the Standard Oil Company. And as he looked around, the low-level workers, the men working in the gas station and so on, they were Catholic. But the top executives, they were Protestant. So he said, okay, I'll be a Protestant. And it wasn't because he changed his theory about the Trinity or anything. It was the kind of people he wanted to be with. Both his bosses and his wife were that. And then he had a son, me, and they sent me to Protestant Sunday school, and it was very boring, and I hated it. And I rebelled, and I started arguing and saying these ideas don't make sense. And then he sympathized with me. So he kind of became a sort of an agnostic or atheist for a while. We had family arguments. My mother still stuck up for the church. But my father and I would raise these logical things. Anyway, my father's not a nice man. I'm not meaning to, I didn't really like him. And in fact, we had some conflicts, so I didn't talk to them for a number of years. But then finally, we made up and became friends again. He came back, and then I was surprised to find now he was a minister in a church. He had gotten a degree, a Doctor of Divinity, by writing. It was he didn't really go to classes or anything, but it'd be the equivalent of doing it online today, to just take a few questionnaires and study something and pass a test, and then you get a Doctor of Divinity. But it gave him all sorts of tax advantages in the United States. For example, he liked to drink wine. Well, the Christian church uses wine as a sacrament, so wine is a religious expense, which meant he could deduct it from his taxes. And well, if the government is paying for half of your wine, you might as well have the good stuff. So he had better quality wine. And he liked to travel on his vacations. And so they would make travel part of the church business. And if they passed out some leaflets about the church, then the whole vacation trip, again, the government would pay half of it. So my point is, the very meaningful aspect of his life that he kept changing, not because of he came to different ideas about Christian theology or the Trinity or the virgin birth or any of the things that Protestants and Catholics disagree on. But rather it was social pressures, it was tax advantages, it was other sorts of issues and arguments. So you can see the free agent making changes there and changing what he believes in, changing his affiliation based on meanings, but deeply embedded in the social system. All right. All right, one or two more things, then we will wrap up. First, I use this expression from economics, there's no free lunch. Well, free will is certainly not a free lunch. If you're using the brain to do reasoning and moral responsibility and so on, that takes more energy. Indeed, this is what got me into the free will research in the first place. Much of my research was on self-control, and we had these findings that free will or that self-control depends on a limited energy research, ego depletion, which it's argued in the replication crisis for a while, but since then it's been overwhelmingly supported. It's I think it's one of the best replicated findings in all of social psychology. So that shows limited energy for self-control. And then we found that it's the same energy is used for making decisions and planning and so on. And so this is what made me think, oh, this is really what free will is all about. This is the philosophical argument linking self-control, rational choice, planning, and initiative. So what that means is, since it takes extra energy and is a depletable resource, free will is not something we have all the time or use all the time. We might have the capacity, but indeed, when you're depleted, you're less likely to behave in free will fashion. And sure enough, plenty of evidence that people are less moral when their willpower is depleted. They are less logical and rational, and so on. Indeed, it also explains why we are so prone to habits and routines, because it takes more energy to make a decision every time. When you get up in the morning, you could decide, well, should I have breakfast first, or get dressed first, or have a shower first, or do something else? And then if I want to have breakfast, what should I have? And so on. Most people do the same things in a routine every morning because they want to conserve their energy for the later challenges of the day. So free will is used to establish these habits, which then enable life to run effectively. If we want to understand, we can pursue this idea. How does free will operate in practice? If you want to study the operation of free will in psychological processes, you can look at the lists of phenomena affected by ego depletion, or our friends in cognitive psychology, the executive functions. From the ego depletion literature, there are 4 kinds of phenomena, and I would say all these are relevant to free will. First, self-control, which is changing yourself, changing your responses, resisting temptation, and so on. Rational choice, incorporating logic into deciding what is the best thing to do in the long run. Planning, making up a story about the future that will guide you step by step so you'll know what to do when you come to that situation in the future. And being active rather than passive. We also have a list we got from cognitive psychology. As I said, the executive function would add a variety of other things, switching back and forth among tasks, working memory. And they have many of the same things: self-control and rational choice, flexible thinking, time management, being more organized. There are different lists of the executive functions. But I'd say all those things are relevant if we want to study and understand free will. A further question now, this is some research done by my colleague Stefan Lau, who contacted me and said he had been doing a variety of studies on what it feels like to have freedom. He'd have people make choices and say, how free did you feel? And this is an important method to study it, to have people's ratings of freedom. He designed these very clever experiences based on what we call the process theory, the process of free will. So you should feel freer when you have more options. There are more choices to choose among. When there are different reasons, so there's one reason to do this, another reason to do that. A deadline reduces your freedom and you have to decide in 5 minutes or something versus you can decide anytime. You're obviously freer. Not knowing what you're going to do, that must increase the sense of freedom and so on. Putting more effort into the decision, thinking harder about it, that's using your free will more. So these are the main theories. It's nice to have two theories, so we wanted to think of an alternative theory for it. So we came up with what we call the outcome theory, which is just people associate free will with getting something good. If the outcome is positive, then they'll feel freer. Well, you've done all the experiments where we went through the data, the outcome theory, the stupid little theory that won every time. All these fancy process variables did not make people feel free. So what people think freedom is for is to get what they want, and preferably they even like to get it easier. Working harder to make the decision made them feel less free. I won't go through all of the results here, but it was in consciousness and cognition a few years ago. All right, I'm running out of time. We wanted to leave a little time for discussion, so let me leap ahead to the conclusions. There's development, there's whether people believe in it or not, self-destructive behavior. These are interesting side effects or side aspects of free will theory to do. And let me just mention one of them. The question of is there a desire for free will? Really talked more about the ability to do it, and the motivations are the basic ones for food and sex and the like. But do we have a desire? Do we like to have control and so on? This, I think, is not really resolved. This is an interesting question for further research. Animals seem to like having control, but having control enables them to get what they want better. So do they like having control for its own sake? This also may go far back in evolution, so it's not something specific to human free will. People clearly like to have choices and options as well. And they like to have the choices, whether they like to make hard decisions, which is what free will is for. They don't seem to like that as much. So the question of the motivational appeal of free will, I think, is an interesting question for further research. So just to conclude, free will is about being able to act differently in the same situation. It's relative on a continuum, not absolute total freedom or total unfreedom. Rather, just some actions are freer than others. And so we need to understand the mental processes that produce the freer ones. It evolved in humans as part of the suite of traits to enable us to do culture, to participate in culture, and to make our society thrive there. And again, the examples of the moral agent, the economic agent, and the information agent, those are not a complete list, but they all show ways in which we are participating in culture. Free will is not about acting randomly. That's a misunderstanding. Free will often in humans uses time, the extended capacity to remember the past and think about the future and plan for it. And that's, of course, very adaptive, and flexibility is good too. Conscious thoughts cause behavior. Clearly they do. Our conscious mind is part of the free will package. And it's tied to the limited willpower, limited energy thing. So it is costly to exert free will, and thus it's something that we do only sometimes, but it's powerful. A human being without these capacities would be much less of a human being. Okay, and so that's my talk. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Dear Professor, we want to thank you. Yeah, it was amazing lecture. So right now, let's keep to short discussion. I would like to ask you here, the guests who are here, maybe you got some questions for the professor. We hope we got some questions. So yeah, I can see. No, better to use the microphone, I think.
Professor, I just wanted to ask you, do you foresee a way to actually measure free will, like in some psychological studies or maybe some kind of physiological factors?
Well, I don't know that it's something we would measure per se. We can measure the parts of it. We can measure self-control, both as personality trait and as behavioral trait. We can measure rationality, logically doing the right thing. We can measure planning. So I think those would be the main aspects. We can measure whether people are more passive or more active, so that might be that. But I don't know that coming up with one measure of free will would be all that informative or useful.
Right. Do we have thank you very much. Do we have more questions from here? From guests? Oh, yeah, I can see one more.
So, Professor, would you say that some people have more free will than others? If it can be measured, then there are probably people who have more and some people have less. Is it something that we can work on or develop?
Well, that is an interesting question. Do some people have more than others? Remember, I said freedom is in the situation. So certainly some people are in situations where they have more freedom than others. Some countries are just much freer than others. So there's that. But I think what you're asking are different people have different mental capacities to make use of these opportunities and to put their freedom to good use. The answer is probably yes on that as well. As I said, some people have better self-control than others, and we can measure that. So self-control is adapting to the situation to get more out of it. And some people more intelligent can understand the possibilities. Some people think more carefully than others. We would say an impulsive person perhaps is not using free will. The person might have the same capability, but if they're impulsive, they don't stop to think as much. So in that sense, some people have more than others, but the capacity to act freely, I think, is there in all of us, and we just need to use it wisely and adaptively, and that takes learning, and so that will differentiate people.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Julia, it was very interesting question. I think we'll try to maybe use 2 or maybe 3 questions from a chat. I got one. Sounds interesting. So, Professor, the question is that we have the studies that show that only human can be prepared for multiple future options. And what about a chat GPT? What do you think? How we can think about the chat GPT in such a case?
Well, that's very interesting. I don't really know how the chat GPT works. It doesn't have full free will in the human sense, but it, of course, can think much better and faster and more flexibly even than a human mind. Remember, it's the machine has no motivation, so it doesn't want. So a crucial part of it is missing. So ChatGPT will not have free will in the sense that a living thing will be an agent that makes decisions so as to get what it wants. The computer has no wants. But the potential for that to make decisions and to dictate what to do, perhaps to invent new things and be creative. That's a very interesting thing to follow. Remember, though, ChatGPT ultimately is a tool. It is a product of human minds.
Okay, this is a question asked by my friend sitting next to me. And the question is, what's the relationship between free will and the religiousness center, and discovered in the brain by neurobiologists.
Okay, I don't quite understand the question. The religious sense studied in the brain. I'm not read. I don't follow the brain research very much.
Can we try again? Yeah.
The religiousness center.
Religiousness center. The questions about some part of the brain, yeah, which is called religiousness center. Do you know something? Do you know anything about it?
I don't. I'm sorry. I don't know anything about it. I should add, some people think a theory of free will have to be a big part of will have to emphasize the brain a lot. And my book does not really talk about the brain very much. As I say in there, I don't think that's the interesting part of it. I mean, of course, we need to understand how the brain works. That's a part of everything. But to me, trying to understand free will by analyzing the brain would be like trying to understand the movie you watched yesterday by taking apart your television set. Because the television set is what created the movie or what made it appear in front of you. But even if you spent years understanding how the television set works, it won't help you understand the movie.
All right, thank you very much. I think, dear professor, we have last question, the short one, but sounds interesting. What do you think? What is the difference between the ego and free will? So, yeah, what is the difference between these two constructs, or if it is some difference, or not really?
All right, the ego is a term from Sigmund Freud, referring to the self. Today we more talk about the self. I used Freud's term ego depletion just because Freud was only the one to talk about energy. Was the only theorist. So free will would be one of the properties of the self, one of the capabilities that it has. I had a book on the self just 2 years ago, which was the culmination of many years of work and much of my career. So there are some similar properties to free will, like the extension over time. Again, the animals mostly live in the immediate present, in the here and now, whereas the human self extends far into the past and future. Your identity in society, you have to say, where were you born, and in what country are you a citizen, and all those things are the past. And likewise, you project into the future, what do you want to happen in the distant future. So the capacity for action, for making choices, that's one of the key parts of the self, of the ego. And that's where free will comes in. So so the free will is much more narrowly focused, and it's about taking action and controlling action and getting things done. The self has other aspects too, such as its self-esteem and its knowledge about itself, its place in society, and all those things.
All right, thank you. I think we will stop here, and we would like to again thank you very much. And maybe you do remember our first emails when I wrote you that because you agreed to be here. I think it's the kind of like it's so amazing, and it kind of also thinking that impossible become possible. So I would like to thank you very, very much. We are very happy to have you here. Yeah, maybe Konrad, you want
Thank
to
you very
say
much.
something more? Yeah, right.
Thank you very much. Really, it was a privilege.
All right, well, thank you for listening, and I hope people enjoyed the talk and found something interesting in it. And as I said, if you want more information, the book will be published in English this September, and I hope we can get it translated into Polish and other languages soon after.
Yeah, but
Right.
we also hope that English it won't be like so problematic in here in Poland. But yeah, we're waiting, of course, for a translation. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
Okay.
Bye, Professor.
Bye-bye.